Hello, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay on a cold, gloomy, slightly gothic day in the Cape Winelands, which makes it a perfect day to be inside drinking wine, which is exactly what I'm doing, and drinking wine with somebody I've been wanting to share wine with for a long time. I've been trying to lure her on to our live show. She has flatly refused. She said, I'm only drinking wine with you if you come down and join me in the Winelands, which is exactly what I have done. Jocelyn, welcome at last to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Great, Dan. Thank you. Good to be here with you. Yeah.
I feel like I know you so well because I drunk so much of your wine and had so much fun doing it. So I love the fact that we're able to do this together, and there's some terrific wine lined up, which I can't wait to charge into. But as we celebrate Women's Month on Dan Really Likes Wine, there's so many stories in the wine industry that we get to share on this show. I'm fascinated about yours. Take us back, if you can, to the first inklings that wine was something you had an interest in, and then how that translated into Jocelyn the winemaker.
Yeah, Dan, so basically it all started back in the Eastern Cape. I was born in Port Elizabeth and grew up in East London, and always had a love for the soil. I love to get my hands into the soil, to grow things. So it was always botany was the idea. I would head in that direction. And great thanks to Mr. Mark Kent from Cliff. He was a huge mentor and an influence in switching my mindset from botany into winemaking and viticulture. So when I was 14, I came down and spent a bit of time with him on the farm. So he was fresh out of Elsenburg and setting up the vineyards, and I was just completely blown away to take botany and take it to this level of something encapsulated in a bottle that deciphers climatic conditions the whole year that vine has experienced. Was just mind-blowing for me. So there and then, 14, decided I wanted to get into wine. Yeah.
That's amazing. Is it a wine family that you come from?
Not at all. So my father was in FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods in the Eastern Cape, and had his granny. So my grandmother was brilliant with plants. So that was a big influence as well. So a lot of people along the way who have been mentors and have helped me on the journey with sort of deciding, which direction to go, and which has been more winemaking than viticulture, but the two work hand in hand. And it's been a really wonderful journey so far. Very good choice, I must say.
Well, I think all of us who drink your wine would definitely agree with that. In terms of drinking wine, there are often, maybe not just one, but a couple of wines early on in your wine drinking life that add that spark to what you want to do. Are there particular ones for you?
Yeah, that's a tough question. There are quite a few. But to narrow them down, because it was such an important part of my journey, was definitely Chateau Moussard, which has influenced the Divergent red blend, which I'll go into further detail when we get to the wine. But meeting Serge Hocha, he came out to South Africa and gave a tasting here. That was 2014, November. The Swartland Revolution, just a major tipping point for me, and helped me decide which direction I wanted to go in my red wine making with Hogan Wines. Yeah.
How did you get to where you are today then, from that 14-year-old who thought, I'd like to make wine, which not many 14-year-olds do, to sitting with me now as this very established winemaker? What was the journey to starting your own label? Yeah,
okay, so tennis was a huge part of my junior career in my teens as well. So wanted to study winemaking, but was offered a tennis scholarship in Texas. So I went over and did a year at BSc Agriculture at Southwest Texas State University. It's just outside of Austin, and couldn't do the winemaking, but at the same time wanted to finish this tennis journey that I was on. And looked at different universities in California to possibly transfer, and there's only one university that offers a full degree in viticulture and enology. That's called UC Davis. So looked at the possibility of transferring there, but it just wasn't working out. I mean, to play up to 4 to 5 hours of tennis a day, and you're doing a seriously practically orientated degree, it was pretty tough to tie the two together. So I got badly injured, and that was sort of the decision point. At 2001, I moved back to South Africa and started my degree here at Stellenbosch. And it's definitely the right decision. So 4-year degree, we had a fantastic class. Peter Allen Finlayson started with me, Chris Allight, Donnie Statler.
Sure.
We had a lot of fun.
It's a heavyweight class.
Yeah, we had a great class. Peter Valser from Blank Bottle was also with us. He was my prac partner.
That must have been interesting, because he's lovely, but he's completely mad.
Nice, divine. I love it. It's all a different interpretation of wine, which is great. Yeah.
I'm in two minds now, because as well as a wine show, I obviously have a sports-themed show, and I could be interviewing you as a Wimbledon champion.
I wish, and I never quite got that far. But it was a lovely journey, the sport, and to continue it, and not just to stop it and go straight into wine, to have sort of fulfilled that, which was great. Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad you found your way into that wine space and into the wine journey. What about the wine philosophy before we get into the wine itself? What's guided you in your approach to what you want to make and how you want to make it?
So Dan, let me finish from when I finished varsity. So from there, because that'll come tie in with the winemaking philosophy, I went on to Western Australia and worked as a cellar hand in Margaret River. And then the intention was to go on to France and work at Le Bon Pasteur at Michel Rolland's property. And I'd met my husband in my third year of university, and it got quite serious in my fourth year, and now I'm going to go travel the world, and we're in a serious relationship. So decided after 4 or 5 months in Australia, no, I needed to come back, and I gave up France. I know, I gave up France and looked for a job here. I was fortunate enough to get the position as assistant winemaker at Flagstone Winery with Bruce Jack. Fabulous experience. Bruce was a wonderful mentor as well, which shaped a lot of my philosophies in winemaking too. So at the time, he was sort of the new wave of the wine industry, experimenting with up to sort of 25 different varietals. So I learned a hell of a lot there, and very grateful for that experience. From there, went on to Le Brie in Franschhoek as general manager and winemaker, and that was absolutely fabulous, just to start a brand, recreate, or I should say a brand, build a cellar from scratch, really holistic to see that approach. And then had my first child during the experience at Le Brie, and decided, no, it is really tricky trying to crush grapes and children and people balding on top of you while you're crushing grapes. Decided I needed to take a bit of sabbatical, and that took me to 4 years sabbatical. And it was my father who approached me and said, listen, I can see you look extremely itchy. Let's do something together. I was missing the wine terribly. And this is how we came about with Hogan, so my maiden surname and a partnership with my father. And first vintage was 2014. So a lot of those steps along the way have guided me to where I am now. And in winemaking philosophy, I've gone completely natural ferment, low intervention. Obviously, sulfur is needed in winemaking. I try to keep those levels as low as possible, and trying to work with the best sites possible. It's to find sites that I believe that variety does best in, and the style of the variety that I prefer from those particular sites has guided me to creating Hogan. Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to drink some of those early vintages. I've still got an occasional bottle or two stashed away, which I don't share with anybody. Those early days, how daunting was that, setting up your own project, your own name, suddenly creating something that's very much on your own terms, but with only one person to answer to, really, if it doesn't go right?
It's tricky, and something wonderful about the industry is the collaboration between the winemakers, the sharing. We're known for it as South Africans, where you can pick up the phone, you can say, I'm looking for this site, this ferment's going wrong, or there's a wealth of knowledge just through your peers in the industry, and I'm very grateful for that. So nerve-wracking in 2014, going full natural ferment on those first 5 barrels that I mentioned to you. And Chris Allard was an absolute star. He had already had Allard going for a couple of years, and he just said to me, Joss, stick with your guns, with your natural ferment. It's going to pay off. I remember phoning him like every day of the ferment saying, oh, these barrels are not smelling great, and what are we going to do? And he's like, relax, it'll be fine. Just ride the wave and it'll be all good. And yeah, it's paid off. Every single wine is naturally fermented now. It is risky. You can lose barrels, but well worth the risk. And now from one wine, the Chenin in 2014, I now have 5 wines, and it's going really nicely. Yeah.
All right, well, let's taste these wines, because they've been staring at me, demanding some attention. I know the Chenin particularly well, because that's the first, it was our first introduction, so to speak, via a bottle of your wine. Where are we now vintage-wise, and what is it about the Chenin and where it's from that stands out for you?
Yeah, Dan, so 2019 vintage on the whites, and 2018 on my Divergent, 2019 on the Cab Franc. So it's one site that I've worked with, one farm since the beginning. A lot of people have said, why have you not diversified into other sites? But it is just so incredibly pure, that those decomposed granite soils, it gives these beautiful crystalline, translucent characters of for Chenin for me. There are other options on soils that you can grow your vines on, but I just absolutely adore the granite and that crystal saline component that comes through in the wine.
Well, as I try some, which I'm doing with much excitement, there's excitement's a good word, because I don't think there's another grape that quite so consistently gets winemakers I speak to excited about in South Africa in terms of what you're able to do with it and the expression that it gives you the potential to bring out in wine.
It's our most planted grape, as you know, and it's a chameleon grape. So much can be done with it. It is so flexible, malleable to the soil type, to the winemaker's style of winemaking. I love it about that. You can really express yourself through Chenin as a winemaker. Yeah.
I'm sure you've just said something very important. I wasn't listening at all. This is, it's that ability to get that blast of freshness, and yet there's just so many layers afterwards that just keep coming through.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, sometimes you look at a great painting, and it's only on the third or the fourth looking that you realise there's a little boat out on the ocean, or there's a small cow sitting on the field. There are these other little things that come through to you, the second and third and fourth sip, or in my case, the second or third or fourth bottle, as good as they are. Is it fun? Is it hard work? What is Chenin like for you?
So being the first wine that I made with starting Hogan, it is my first love. It pulls at my heartstrings. So no, it's an absolute delight to work with Chenin, and particularly in the Swartland. I mean, in Stellenbosch too, we have incredible sites all over the Western Cape for Chenin. But it's just, as you mentioned, this layering component. As the wine moves through different temperature levels too, it becomes something totally different from when it's chilled and straight out of the fridge to give it half an hour in the glass and see what evolves. An important technique in winemaking for me was leaving the wine in contact with the gross leaves. It's a bit geeky, but it gives a lovely slow, what we call autolysis, like a breakdown of the leaves, and the richness and texture in the wine that you get from this process. Also, multiple pickings. It's another thing when starting, and you've got one shot at just your 2 tons. I mean, that picking date is crucial. And now that I've grown to about 14, 15 tons of Chenin that I take in, I pick over 3-4 pickings. So that's a lot more complexity in those different ripening levels that you get, and different barrels from different pickings that come to the final blend. It's been a really fun.
Final one on the Chenin. We're drinking now 2019. Is it made to last another 5, another 10, another 15? When do you think this is hitting peak?
Dan, so it's got fantastic pH. It's from a cooler slope. It's southeast facing, so pH helps with longevity of wine. So we're looking at a pH of about 3.3, 3.4, which is fantastic for a warm area. And I'd say I prefer the wine in its 5th year. I think it's in its peak, but depending on how you like your style of Chenin, some people like a slightly more evolved. It starts to become a little bit oxidative towards year 8, 9, and 10, but it's a personal preference. But I would say up to year 5, I'd say the wines are really in their prime, my Chenins at least.
All right. 2024, I'll hang on to this until
then. There we go.
All right, white wine number 1 is done, very happily so. Some Chardonnay next.
Chard, absolutely. So in 2018, I added 2 extra wines onto the range, which was the Galvanised Chardonnay and Mirror for the Sun Cabernet Franc. And always adored Chard. I worked with a lot of Chardonnay while I was at Le Brie in Franschhoek and had some great success there with the varietal. But initially experimented with a couple of sites to finally decide on which sites work best for me, and have settled on Bannock, so a site that's on the slopes of the Simonsberg, adjacent to Tolima, and a site in the Helderberg. So these are younger vines from the Helderberg, and vines about 15 years old from the Bannock. So in Bannock, richer clay soils, which give a little bit more structure, and from the Helderberg, younger vines, about 6 years old, more fruit-driven, more complexity by using 2 different sites, I find, yeah.
There does seem to be something particularly about Chardonnay out of Banhoek. I know Bartney won a couple of big international awards with the wine that Renell's making. Everything just seems to come right in terms of Chardonnay there. It's a really nice home for the grape.
Definitely. And at any one time, we found, living in Bannock now for close on 20 years, we're about 5 degrees cooler in Stellenbosch, particularly right at the back of the valley. And that's beneficial, hugely beneficial to a white varietal. So, and great soils. We have really good soils in the Bannock.
All right, I am going to try it. As I do, the Galvanised Chardonnay. Talk me through it being galvanised. It's a wine process I've never heard of.
Nothing to do with the wine process. I wanted to add a bit more of a personal note to the wine. So it's songs and lyrics that have inspired me, and we often play in the cellar just when we're feeling a little bit flat and we want to energize ourselves. I do a lot of running in the Bannock Valley too on the trails. We've got beautiful trails around here, and This is one of the particular songs I listened to when that hill is this steep and I got to get up it. So it's a band called the Chemical Brothers, and the song is called Galvanised. So it's like a really, really energetic song. And then by bringing these different sites together, instead of just working with one site, galvanizing, energizing the blend. So a couple of factors that come into the name, and just add a bit of lightness and fun. Yeah.
Well, there you go. If you're watching the show at the moment and you are a member of the Chemical Brothers, you have made it. Jocelyn has been inspired to name one of her wines after you. So well done, Chemical Brothers. Well done, Jocelyn, too, because it's a style of Chardonnay that is going to appeal to so many people because you're letting the fruit tell the story and do so richly. And I love the fact that you've brought in those different areas. It's winemaking as art in that sense, isn't it? And that you've got to try and blend those together and work out a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and what's going to give me that perfect picture.
Totally that, yeah. And tricky, difficult decisions. I mean, I'm from Bannock. It would have been nice to have made the blend 100% Bannock, but that component of the Helderberg was just lifting and adding something extra that just, I couldn't leave it alone. Yeah.
Just gives it a little bit of buoyancy.
And in being an independent and, not stuck with an estate concept, there's so much freedom of what you can blend with, what you can play with it. There's a great joy in that in winemaking. There really is, yeah.
And we're seeing so many people do it at the moment and really get the best out of the winelands, which I love. All right, one last white. What completes our trio here?
Okay, so a new fun experimental wine called The Lift. It is a multi-vintage wine of 2018, 2019 and 2020 Chenin, all from the farm in Swartland where I source my grapes from. And it's something unusual in that it's aged under floor yeast. So this is a concept that's used in Andalusia in Spain when they make sherry. So basically a yeast film develops on the top of the barrel, and that creates a very refreshing, light, umami style wine. So there's a conversion that happens chemically in the wine, and which creates this lightness and freshness and like salty, beautiful characters. It's not everyone's cup of tea. It's something fun, more aperitif style. But have a go and let me know what you think.
It's more pronounced in some than others, but there's definitely the mad scientist gene in most winemakers.
Got to keep experimenting, learning, challenging, yeah.
Sure. It is lovely, but it's not what I was expecting.
So bone dry. So these yeasts actually eat up part of the alcohol, which give it this, and the residual sugar, which give it this lovely, lovely, salty, bone-dry character.
I felt I was getting healthier by drinking
this. There we go.
So if that's the case, what is the alcohol in this?
It's 12.2. Okay. So yeah, it was probably in the region of about 12.6 and has come down to about 12.2 during this floor process that happens with the yeast, yeah.
And it's got less sugar. Drink this wine, become a better and healthier person. So it's obviously bottled, it's on commercial release. Long-term project, or are there going to be these sort of one-offs from time to time?
Definitely long-term with this one. So I spent a bit of time in Andalusia and just was blown away by the Finos, Olorosos, the different styles of sherry. This was my varsity years, and there was always the intention to play with floor. Another winemaker, Bernard Brodel from Signs of Sinai. I'm not sure if you're aware of his brand, yeah. He very kindly gifted me the mother culture of the floor because it doesn't grow in every climate. It prefers to be close to the ocean, and his little cellar in Helderberg is close to the ocean. He gets a beautiful floor layer that develops. So off I went and I said, Bernard, can I please trade it's a bit like baking, with a mother culture, yeah. He gave me a little culture of his yeast. I inoculated the barrel. It worked fantastically, and I'm now growing my own mother culture from this. Yeah, so this whole sharing component between the winemakers, which is great, really, really great.
Oh, yeah. I think a bottle of this. I'm picturing myself, because we spoke earlier before we started filming about wine tasting different in different parts of the world. And I think you have a glass of this with a nice big paella sitting in Spain.
Definitely, good work.
Seafood.
Sushi as well. I've experimented with the whole Chenin sushi day. Yeah, we were playing around with the lift with it, and on those sort of fattier pieces of salmon, that beautiful salinity and fresh acidity just cuts through the nice seared piece of salmon beautifully.
That duet and food of wine.
There we go.
All right, well, fascinating wine and three lovely, lovely whites. We move on to the reds, and here I get very excited because I do have a mild obsession with Cabernet Franc.
Brilliant.
And that's our first red.
Great. So also introduced in 2018. Divergent was introduced in 2015. And Cab Franc, I've just adored the variety. I remember waitressing at 96 Winery Road during my varsity years, and Cordoba Crescendo was available on the list, and just being so influenced by that wine and the Helderberg, and just how well Cabernet Franc does in the Helderberg. So initially experimented with 2 sites, so a site just above Cordoba and then a lower Helderberg site, and totally stylistically, totally different wines were produced. So quite rich and intense, the one from the higher site, which is on clay soils, and the lower site on granite was just beautiful perfume, red fruit, what I like to call like ballerina style Cab Franc, where just it's purity and subtle, so subtle. So I went with the lower Helderberg site, and this is what we have in the glass. So we are now in our 3rd vintage of making this, and I will continue to take it from just this one site.
Oh, just that perfume. Cab Franc is one of those where you've kind of got a reasonably narrow space. It can go a bit too green, or it can go a little bit the other way. But when you strike it right, as I suspect you will have, it is glorious.
So it also ties in with the name, Mirror for the Sun. And so when it comes to December, we do a process where we remove leaves in the bunch zone to try and get as much sunlight to those bunches to prevent any green flavors. As you mentioned, this is what you're wary of. You don't want these heavy pyrazine green pepper flavors. I'm trying to aim more for arganum and rosemary, these subtle green savory notes, and not this intense greenness. And that Mirror for the Sun is from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, a song of theirs. And in essence, the bunches being like a mirror for the sun, and how we remove leaves and balance the canopy to get sunlight in. Yeah.
Oh, well, I love it. There's a music to the wine, which is great. And it's interesting that although these grapes aren't from exactly where we are today here at De Zeven in the Bannock, we have got just around the corner some fabulous South African Cabernet Franc and Rainbow's End and Oldenburg.
Absolutely.
And to me, that speaks for this particular grape. And I've said it many times on the show. For so long, it sat quietly in the background of so many blends. And it's really coming to the fore now in South Africa. And people are giving it the chance to talk on its own terms.
Definitely. Good planting material, using the right clones, planting in the right areas. We've learned a lot. So fantastic to see it coming into focus for South Africa, Cab Franc. Yeah.
Oh, that is a delight. All right, one last wine as we come to the end. And this was the very first red.
First red, yeah. So Divergent, 2018 vintage.
I'm trying to think if I can remember a band who had a song called Divergent.
And so nothing to do with music in this case. It was purely a diverging path, and hence called it Divergent. So the intention with this wine was to make a Cab Cinsault blend inspired by the wines from the 60s and 70s. I believe these are some of our best wines we've made in South Africa. And I mean, amazing that you could call a wine straight Cab Sav and have up to 50% Cinsault in. So the laws have changed quite a lot since then. And then attended this tasting in 2014 that I mentioned earlier at the Swartland Revolution, where Serge Hoscher from Chateau Mouzon was the guest. And I knew very little about his wines, and to sit through a 3-hour tasting with this gentleman, these wines were in front of us, and he said nothing about the wine. He just told stories about life and his experiences of drinking wine and beautiful lunches and beautiful women. And then right at the end, people are like, please tell us more about the wine. He's like, okay, I'll tell you more about the wine. And he discloses that the blend is Cabernet Sauvignon, Cinsault, and Carignan. And I just loved this unusualness of Carignan. It brought like this wild, brambly, black Morello cherry component to the wine, which I just adored. And his flight of wines, I remember it was a 1989 and the 2003, and that flight were my favorites. But the oldest wine tasted like the youngest. I've never experienced that in a wine tasting before. So there's something crazy going on with these wines, how they just opened up as they became older. Anyway, well, I had my Cabernet Sauvignon and my Cinsault vineyards lined up, and hearing about Carignan, I knew so little about it. I was like, I need to go and get hold of some Carignan. And there's more to the story. So there was a family friend out in Wellington, the Welgegend farm, Alex and Sheila Camera, owned a farm there. And Alex had been calling me during my years at Libri and Flagstone, saying, you've got to get onto Carignan. It's the most phenomenal variety. I was like, Alex, what am I going to do with Carignan? I'm making a state wine. It can't be added to anything. So all of a sudden, this guy had been calling me for 10 years. This all fell into place, that now Serge mentioning Carignan in his blend, I was like, okay, this has to happen. And went and spoke to Alex and got hold of the grapes. And yeah, it's been the blend percentage since the beginning, and it works really well for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an estate out in Robertson that's got a little bit of Carignan, and I know Azelle at the Mentors has done a Carignan, but it's not something we see very much of.
It's a single varietal, very little. It's used a lot in France for rosé, and Francois Hasbrook from Blackwater does a great example of a straight Carignan, but there's very little of it. As a blending component, it's amazing. It's got a very high natural acidity, so my Cab and my Cinza are very average acidity, so I sort of naturally get the acid balanced out by using this variety.
Oh, it's just beautifully savoury and like Moorish vanilla. I do really enjoy it. I've had it a couple of times.
Wonderful,
it was one of the early wines that I've had. What is the blend? What makes it up?
It tends to be roughly a third of all three varietals. Yeah, I find pushing the Carignan close to 50%. It's quite an austere variety. It can be a little bit too dominant, but there's a beautiful spice, a Middle Eastern spice called sumac, that is used in a lot of Ottolenghi's cooking that I find in this, so much so with the Carignan. Pairs beautifully with Ottolenghi's foods as well. Yeah.
I don't think you're allowed to make an Ottolenghi dish without sumac.
I don't think so. Or za'atar, or one of those. So, yeah.
Well, I'll have to have some more of this with some of Ottolenghi's cooking. It's a terrific selection of wine. I suspect, though, that you're probably not done just yet. What does the future hold for the brand?
Dan, and everyone keeps telling me, slow down, don't add too many babies, keep the focus. So for now, very happy with the 5 wines, and I want to grow the lift. It was literally just 2 barrels. But it's very hard to know how many of the floors are going to work, and sometimes they don't take, and so that is risky winemaking. But I think I'd see for the next 4 to 5 years, I'll stick with this range. We would love to plant some vineyards on our farm in Bannock, my husband and I. So we are on a fruit and flower farm, and we've isolated some land and looking at doing some Cab Franc and Chard. So that's sort of in the 5-year plan. And so far, growing exports. I've been very grateful to all my importers for the amount of support over this difficult time for South Africa. They've really come to the fore and doubled their orders, try to help where they can. So I've been grateful for that, and hopefully we can travel next year. I can get out there and market and sell a bit more and do more face-to-face tasting,
Well, I will certainly be happy to do that, because this has been an absolute delight, and I'm glad we finally got together to drink some wine. A final question for you before we let you go and we wrap up with our tasting. In terms of where we are as a broader South African wine industry, what would you like to see over those next 5 years South Africa doing a bit more of to become, I suppose success is a very relative term, but maybe showcasing South Africa at its very best?
Tricky question. I think education, more so, very important, of people within wine cellars, within the vineyards, to understand why they're doing certain processes, why are we pruning this way, that. And if you start at ground level from the worker in the vineyard and educate correctly, it translates all the way through to better quality wine. I think what's happened in the past 10 years, quality-wise, for South Africa has been huge. We've made some massive strides. So to keep that momentum going, and to be proud of what we produce in South Africa, to charge properly for our wines. I mean, we make phenomenal wine. Why should we charge bottom-end prices for some really, really great stuff? Quality-driven focus is an important thing for me for South Africa, and education within the industry is a huge part too.
All right. I think you also probably have an army now of South African bands dreaming of one day having one of their songs inspire one of your wines. So we'll see if that happens over the next few years. It's just always lovely drinking your wine, and today's been no exception. So thank you for it. Keep making terrific wine. Thank you for the time today.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for the opportunity.
I look forward to seeing these unfold in due course. And 2024, I've got down in particular for that, Shannon.
Perfect. Wonderful.
There we go. Deserven Guest House, where we find ourselves on a cold, bitter Welsh type of morning, but warmed up immensely by not just some terrific wine, but yet another example of a wonderful South African woman in wine, and Jocelyn giving me 5 absolute crackers that you should definitely have on your to-drink list. Cheers. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.